Stephen Paul Jobs, February 24, 1955, October 5, 2011, was an American business magnate, entrepreneur, industrial designer, investor, and media proprietor. He was the chairman, chief executive officer, CEO, and co-founder of Apple Incorporated, the chairman and majority shareholder of Pixar, a member of the Walt Disney Company's board of directors following its acquisition of Pixar, and the founder, chairman, and CEO of NeXT. Jobs is widely recognized as a pioneer of the microcomputer revolution of the 1970s and 1980s, along with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. Jobs was born in San Francisco, California, and put up for adoption. He was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. He attended Reed College in 1972 before dropping out that same year, and traveled through India in 1974 seeking enlightenment and studying Zen Buddhism. His declassified FBI report states that he used marijuana and LSD while he was in college, and once told a reporter that taking LSD was one of the 2 or 3 most important things he had done in his life. Jobs and Wozniak co-founded Apple in 1976 to sell Wozniak's Apple I personal computer. Together the duo gained fame and wealth a year later with the Apple II, one of the first highly successful mass-produced personal computers. Jobs saw the commercial potential of the Xerox Salto in 1979, which was mouse-driven and had a graphical user interface, GUI. This led to development of the unsuccessful Apple Lisa in 1983, followed by the breakthrough Macintosh in 1984, the first mass-produced computer with a GUI. The Macintosh introduced the desktop publishing industry in 1985 with the addition of the Apple Laser Writer, the first laser printer to feature vector graphics. Jobs was forced out of Apple in 1985 after a long power struggle with the company's board and its then CEO John Sculley. That same year, Jobs took a few of Apple's members with him to found NeXT, a computer platform development company that specialized in computers for higher education and business markets. In addition, he helped to develop the visual effects industry when he funded the computer graphics division of George Lucas's Lucasfilm in 1986. The new company was Pixar, which produced the first 3D computer animated film Toy Story, 1995. Apple merged with NeXT in 1997, and Jobs became CEO of his former company within a few months. He was largely responsible for helping revive Apple, which had been at the verge of bankruptcy. He worked closely with designer Jony Ive to develop a line of products that had larger cultural ramifications, beginning in 1997 with a Think Different advertising campaign and leading to the iMac, iTunes, iTunes Store, Apple Store, iPod, iPhone, App Store, and the iPad. In 2001, the original Mac OS was replaced with a completely new Mac OS X, based on NeXT's NeXT platform, giving the OS a modern Unix-based foundation for the first time. Jobs was diagnosed with a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor in 2003. He died of respiratory arrest related to the tumor at age 56 on October 5, 2011. Background: Biological and adoptive family. Stephen Paul Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, to Abdul Fattah Jindali and Joanne Siebel, and was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, née Hagopian. His biological father, Abdul Fattah John al-Jindali, Arabic, born 1931, grew up in Homs, Syria, and was born into an Arab Muslim household. While an undergraduate at the American University of Beirut, Lebanon, he was a student activist and spent time in jail for his political activities. He pursued a PhD at the University of Wisconsin, where he met Joanne Carol Siebel, a Catholic of Swiss and German descent. As a doctoral candidate, Jindali was a teaching assistant for a course Siebel was taking, although both were the same age. Mona Simpson, Jobs' biological sister, notes that her maternal grandparents were not happy that their daughter was dating a Muslim. Walter Isaacson, Steve Jobs' official biographer, additionally states that Siebel's father threatened to cut Joanne off completely if she continued the relationship. Jobs' adoptive father, Paul Reinhold Jobs, was a Coast Guard mechanic. After leaving the Coast Guard, Paul Jobs married Clara Hagopian in 1946. Clara, the daughter of Armenian immigrants, grew up in San Francisco. Paul Jobs was a repo man who repaired cars. Their attempts to start a family were halted after Clara had an ectopic pregnancy, leading them to consider adoption in 1955. Birth. Sibyl became pregnant with Jobs in 1954 when she and Gendley spent the summer with his family in Homs, Syria. Gendley has stated that he was very much in love with Joanne, but sadly, her father was a tyrant, and forbade her to marry me, as I was from Syria. And so she told me she wanted to give the baby up for adoption. According to Gendley, Sibyl deliberately did not involve him in the process. Without telling me, Joanne upped and left to move to San Francisco to have the baby without anyone knowing, including me. She did not want to bring shame onto the family and thought this was the best for everyone. Sibyl gave birth to Jobs on February 24, 1955 in San Francisco and chose an adoptive couple for him that was Catholic, well-educated, and wealthy. The couple changed their mind, however, and decided to adopt a girl instead. The baby boy was then placed with Paul and Clara Jobs, neither of whom had a college education, and Sibyl refused to sign the adoption papers. She then took the matter to court in an attempt to have her baby placed with a different family and only consented to releasing the baby to Paul and Clara after they promised that he would attend college. When Steve Jobs was in high school, his mother Clara admitted to his girlfriend, 17-year-old Kristen Brennan, that she was too frightened to love Steve. For the first 6 months of his life, I was scared they were going to take him away from me. Even after we won the case, Steve was so difficult to child that by the time he was 2 I felt we had made a mistake. I wanted to return him. When Kristen shared his mother's comment with Steve, he stated that he was already aware of that and would later say he was deeply loved and indulged by Paul and Clara. Many years later, Steve Jobs' wife Lorraine also noted that he felt he had been really blessed by having the two of them as parents. Jobs would become upset when Paul and Clara were referred to as his adoptive parents. He regarded them as his parents 1000%. With regard to his biological parents, Jobs referred to them as my sperm and egg bank. That's not harsh, it's just the way it was, a sperm bank thing, nothing more. Childhood. Paul and Clara adopted Jobs' sister Patricia in 1957 and the family moved to Mountain View, California, in 1961. It was during this time that Paul built a workbench in his garage for his son in order to pass along his love of mechanics. Jobs, meanwhile, admired his father's craftsmanship because he knew how to build anything. If we needed a cabinet, he would build it. When he built our fence, he gave me a hammer so I could work with him. I wasn't that into fixing cars, but I was eager to hang out with my dad. By the time he was 10, Jobs was deeply involved in electronics and befriended many of the engineers who lived in the neighborhood. He had difficulty making friends with children his own age, however, and was seen by his classmates as a loner. Jobs had difficulty functioning in a traditional classroom, tended to resist authority figures, frequently misbehaved, and was suspended a few times. Clara had taught him to read as a toddler, and Jobs stated that he was pretty bored in school and had turned into a little terror. You should have seen us in the 3rd grade, we basically destroyed the teacher. He frequently played pranks on others at Monteloma Elementary School in Mountain View. His father Paul, who was abused as a child, never reprimanded him, however, and instead blamed the school for not challenging his brilliant son. Jobs would later credit his 4th grade teacher, Emma Jean Teddy Hill, with turning him around. She taught an advanced 4th grade class and it took her about a month to get hip to my situation. She bribed me into learning. She would say, I really want you to finish this workbook. I'll give you $5 if you finish it. That really kindled a passion in me for learning things. I learned more that year than I think I learned in any other year in school. They wanted me to skip the next 2 years in grade school and go straight to junior high to learn a foreign language, but my parents very wisely wouldn't let it happen. Jobs skipped the 5th grade and transferred to the 6th grade at Crittenden Middle School in Mountain View, where he became a socially awkward loner. Jobs was often bullied and gave his parents an ultimatum: They had to either take him out of Crittenden or he would drop out of school. Though the Jobs family was not well off, they used all their savings in 1967 to buy a new home, allowing Jobs to change schools. The new house, a 3-bedroom home on Crist Drive in Los Altos, California, was in the better Cupertino School District, Cupertino, California, and was embedded in an environment that was even more heavily populated with engineering families than the Mountain View area was. The house was declared a historic site in 2013, as it was the first site for Apple Computer. As of 2013, it was owned by Patty and occupied by Jobs' stepmother, Marilyn. When he was 13 in 1968, Jobs was given a summer job by Bill Hewlett, of Hewlett-Packard, after Jobs cold called him to ask for parts for an electronics project. Homestead High. The location of the Los Altos home meant that Jobs would be able to attend nearby Homestead High School, which had strong ties to Silicon Valley. He began his first year there in late 1968 along with Fernandez. Neither Jobs nor Fernandez, whose father was a lawyer, came from engineering households and thus decided to enroll in John McCollum's Electronics 1. McCollum and the rebellious Jobs, who had grown his hair long and become involved in the growing counterculture, would eventually clash and Jobs began to lose interest in the class. He underwent a change during mid-1970. I got stoned for the first time, I discovered Shakespeare, Dylan Thomas, and all that classic stuff. I read Moby Dick and went back as a junior taking creative writing classes. Jobs also later noted to his official biographer that I started to listen to music a whole lot, and I started to read more outside of just science and technology, Shakespeare, Plato. I loved King Lear. When I was a senior I had this phenomenal AP English class. The teacher was this guy who looked like Ernest Hemingway. He took a bunch of us snowshoeing in Yosemite. From that point, Jobs developed 2 different circles of friends, those who were involved in electronics and engineering and those who were interested in art and literature. These dual interests were particularly reflected during Jobs' senior year as his best friends were Wozniak and his first girlfriend, the artistic Homestead junior Greisenbrennan. In 1971, after Wozniak began attending University of California, Berkeley, Jobs would visit him there a few times a week. This experience led him to study in nearby Stanford University Student Union. Jobs also decided that rather than join the Electronics Club, he would put on light shows with a friend for Homestead's avant-garde jazz program. He was described by a Homestead classmate as kind of a brain and kind of a hippie, but he never fit into either group. He was smart enough to be a nerd, but wasn't nerdy. And he was too intellectual for the hippies, who just wanted to get wasted all the time. He was kind of an outsider. In high school everything revolved around what group you were in, and if you weren't in a carefully defined group, you weren't anybody. He was an individual, in a world where individuality was suspect. By his senior year in late 1971, he was taking freshman English class at Stanford and working on a Homestead underground film project with Greisenbrennan. In mid-1972, after graduation and before leaving for Reed College, Jobs and Brennan rented a house from their other roommate, Al. Reed College. Later in the year, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. Reed was an expensive school that Paul and Clara could ill afford, and they were spending much of their life savings on their son's higher education. Brennan remained involved with Jobs while he was at Reed. She also met his friend at Reed, Daniel Kotke, for the first time. Jobs also became friends with Reed's student body president, Robert Friedland. Brennan was now a senior at Homestead, and she did not have plans to attend college. She was supportive of Jobs when he told her that he planned to drop out of Reed because he did not want to spend his parents' money on it. Neither her father nor Jobs' adoptive parents had gone to college. Jobs continued to attend by auditing his classes, which included a course on calligraphy that was taught by Robert Palladino. Jobs was no longer an official student, and Brennan stopped visiting him. Jobs later asked her to come and live with him in a house he rented near the Reed campus, but she refused. In a 2005 commencement speech at Stanford University, Jobs stated that during this period, he slept on the floor in friends' dorm rooms, returned Coke bottles for food money, and got weekly free meals at the local Hare Krishna temple. In that same speech, Jobs said, "If I had never dropped in on that single calligraphy course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts." 1972 to 1985. Pre-Apple. In mid-1973, Jobs moved back to the San Francisco Bay Area and was renting his own apartment. Jobs hitchhiked and worked around the West Coast, and Brennan would occasionally join him. Jobs and Brennan remained involved with each other while continuing to see other people. In 1973, Steve Wozniak designed his own version of the classic video game Pong. After finishing it, Wozniak gave the board to Jobs, who then took the game down to Atari Incorporated in Los Gatos, California. Atari thought that Jobs had built it and gave him a job as a technician. Atari's co-founder Nolan Bushnell later described him as difficult but valuable, pointing out that he was very often the smartest guy in the room, and he would let people know that. By early 1974, Jobs was living what Brennan describes as a simple life in a Los Gatos cabin, working at Atari, and saving money for his impending trip to India. Jobs traveled to India in mid-1974 to visit Neem Karoli Baba at his Kanchai ashram with his Reed friend, and eventual Apple employee, Daniel Kotke, in search of spiritual enlightenment. When they got to the Neem Karoli ashram, it was almost deserted because Neem Karoli Baba had died in September 1973. Then they made a long trek up a dry riverbed to an ashram of Hidakhan Babaji. After 7 months, Jobs left India and returned to the US ahead of Daniel Kotke. Jobs had changed his appearance, his head was shaved and he wore traditional Indian clothing. During this time, Jobs experimented with psychedelics, later calling his LSD experiences one of the 2 or 3 most important things he had done in his life. He spent a period at the All One Farm, a commune in Oregon that was owned by Robert Friedland. Brennan joined him there for a period. During this time period, Jobs and Brennan both became practitioners of Zen Buddhism through the Zen master Kabunchino Otogawa. Jobs was living in his parents' backyard toolshed, which he had converted into a bedroom. Jobs engaged in lengthy meditation retreats at the Tsuchira Zen Mountain Center, the oldest Soto Zen monastery in the U.S. He considered taking up monastic residence at Aihaiji in Japan, and maintained the lifelong appreciation for Zen. Jobs then returned to Atari and was assigned to create the circuit board for the arcade video game Breakout. According to Bushnell, Atari offered $100 for each TTL chip that was eliminated in the machine. Jobs had little specialized knowledge of circuit board design and made a deal with Wozniak to split the fee evenly between them if Wozniak could minimize the number of chips. Much to the amazement of Atari engineers, Wozniak reduced the TTL count to 46, a design so tight that it was impossible to reproduce on an assembly line. According to Wozniak, Jobs told him that Atari gave them only $700, instead of the $5,000 paid out, and that Wozniak's share was thus $350. Wozniak did not learn about the actual bonus until 10 years later, but said that if Jobs had told him about it and explained that he needed the money, Wozniak would have given it to him. 104 to 107. Wozniak had designed a low-cost digital blue box to generate the necessary tones to manipulate the telephone network, allowing free long-distance calls. Jobs decided that they could make money selling it. The clandestine sales of the illegal blue boxes went well and perhaps planted the seed in Jobs's mind that electronics could be both fun and profitable. Jobs, in a 1994 interview, recalled that it took 6 months for him and Wozniak to figure out how to build the blue boxes. Jobs said that if not for the blue boxes, there would have been no Apple. He states it showed them that they could take on large companies and beat them. Jobs and Wozniak attended meetings of the Homebrew Computer Club in 1975, which was a stepping stone to the development and marketing of the first Apple computer. Apple, 1976 to 1985. In 1976, Wozniak designed and developed the Apple I computer and showed it to Jobs, who suggested that they sell it. That same year, Jobs, Wozniak, and administrative supervisor Ronald Wayne founded Apple Computer, now called Apple Incorporated, in the garage of Jobs' Los Altos home on Crist Drive. Wayne stayed only a short time, leaving Jobs and Wozniak as the active primary co-founders of the company. The two decided on the name Apple after Jobs returned from the All-One Farm commune in Oregon and told Wozniak about his time spent in the farm's apple orchard. A neighbor on Crist Drive recalled Jobs as an odd individual who would greet his clients with his underwear hanging out, barefoot and hippie-like. Another neighbor, Larry Waterland, who had just earned his Ph.D. in chemical engineering at Stanford, recalled dismissing Jobs' budding business. "You punched cards, put them in a big deck," he said about the mainframe machines of that time. "Steve took me over to the garage. He had a circuit board with a chip on it, a Dumont TV set, a Panasonic cassette tape deck and a keyboard. He said, 'This is an Apple computer.' I said, 'You've got to be joking.' I dismissed the whole idea." Jobs' friend from Reed College in India, Daniel Kotke, recalled that as an early Apple employee, he was the only person who worked in the garage. Woz would show up once a week with his latest code. Steve Jobs didn't get his hands dirty in that sense. Kotke also stated that much of the early work took place in Jobs' kitchen, where he spent hours on the phone trying to find investors for the company. They received funding from a then semi-retired Intel product marketing manager and engineer Mike Markula. Scott McNealy, one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystems, said that Jobs broke a glass-age ceiling in Silicon Valley because he'd created a very successful company at a young age. Markula brought Apple to the attention of Arthur Rock, which after looking at the crowded Apple booth at the Homebrew Computer Show, started with a $60,000 investment and went on the Apple board. After Brennan returned from her own journey to India, she and Jobs fell in love again, as Brennan noted changes in him that she attributes to Kaban, whom she was also still following. It was also at this time that Jobs displayed a prototype Apple computer for Brennan and his parents in their living room. Brennan notes a shift in this time period, where the two main influences on Jobs were Apple and Kaban. By early 1977, she and Jobs would spend time together at her home at Duvnek Ranch in Los Altos, which served as a hostel and environmental education center. Brennan also worked there as a teacher for inner-city children who came to learn about the farm. In 1977, Jobs and Wozniak introduced the Apple II at the West Coast Computer Fair. It was the first consumer product sold by Apple Computer and was one of the first highly successful mass-produced microcomputer products in the world, and was primarily designed by Wozniak. Jobs oversaw the development of the Apple II's unusual case and Rod Holt developed the unique power supply. Jobs usually went to work wearing a black long-sleeved mock turtleneck made by Sue Miyake. It was sometimes reported as St. Croix brand, Levi's 501 blue jeans, and New Balance 991 sneakers. He said his choice was inspired by that of Stuart Gemin, a noted applied mathematics professor at Brown University. Jobs told his biographer Walter Isaacson he came to like the idea of having a uniform for himself, both because of its daily convenience, the rationale he claimed, and its ability to convey a signature style. As Jobs became more successful with his new company, his relationship with Brennan grew more complex. In 1977, the success of Apple was now a part of their relationship, and Brennan, Daniel Kotke, and Jobs moved into a house near the Apple office in Cupertino. Brennan eventually took a position in the shipping department at Apple. Brennan's relationship with Jobs deteriorated as his position with Apple grew, and she began to consider ending the relationship. In October 1977, Brennan was approached by Rod Holt, who asked her to take a paid apprenticeship designing blueprints for the Apples. Both Holt and Jobs believed that it would be a good position for her, given her artistic abilities. Holt was particularly eager that she take the position and puzzled by her ambivalence toward it. Brennan's decision, however, was overshadowed by the fact that she realized she was pregnant and that Jobs was the father. It took her a few days to tell Jobs, whose face, according to Brennan, turned ugly at the news. At the same time, according to Brennan, at the beginning of her third trimester, Jobs said to her, "I never wanted to ask that you get an abortion. I just didn't want to do that." He also refused to discuss the pregnancy with her. Brennan turned down the internship and decided to leave Apple. She stated that Jobs told her, "If you give up this baby for adoption, you will be sorry and I am never going to help you." According to Brennan, Jobs started to seed people with the notion that I slept around and he was infertile, which meant that this could not be his child. A few weeks before she was due to give birth, Brennan was invited to deliver her baby at the All One farm. She accepted the offer. When Jobs was 23, the same age as his biological parents when they had him, Brennan gave birth to her baby, Lisa Brennan, on May 17, 1978. Jobs went there for the birth after he was contacted by Robert Friedland, their mutual friend and the farm owner. While distant, Jobs worked with her on a name for the baby, which they discussed while sitting in the fields on a blanket. Brennan suggested the name Lisa, which Jobs also liked, and notes that Jobs was very attached to the name Lisa while he was also publicly denying paternity. She would discover later that during this time, Jobs was preparing to unveil a new kind of computer that he wanted to give a female name. His first choice was Claire after St. Clair. She also stated that she never gave him permission to use the baby's name for a computer and he hid the plans from her. Jobs also worked with his team to come up with a phrase, "local integrated software architecture," as an alternative explanation for the Apple Lisa. Decades later, however, Jobs admitted to his biographer Walter Isaacson that obviously, it was named for my daughter. When Jobs denied paternity, a DNA test established him as Lisa's father. It required him to give Brennan $385 a month in addition to returning the welfare money she had received. Jobs gave her $500 a month at the time when Apple went public and Jobs became a millionaire. Later, Brennan agreed to give an interview with Michael Moritz for Time magazine for its Time Person of the Year special, released on January 3, 1983, in which she discussed her relationship with Jobs. Rather than name Jobs the Person of the Year, the magazine named the computer the Machine of the Year. In the issue, Jobs questioned the reliability of the paternity test, which stated that the probability of paternity for Jobs, Stephen, is 94.1%. Jobs responded by arguing that 28% of the male population of the United States could be the father. Time also noted that the baby girl and the machine on which Apple has placed so much hope for the future share the same name, Lisa. Jobs was worth over $1 million in 1978 when he was just 23 years old. His net worth grew to over $250 million by the time he was 25, according to estimates. He was also one of the youngest people ever to make the Forbes list of the nation's richest people, and one of only a handful to have done it themselves, without inherited wealth. In 1978, Apple recruited Mike Scott from National Semiconductor to serve as CEO for what turned out to be several turbulent years. In 1983, Jobs lured John Sculley away from Pepsi-Cola to serve as Apple's CEO, asking, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want a chance to change the world?" 386 to 387. In 1982, Jobs bought an apartment in the two top floors of the San Remo, a Manhattan building with a politically progressive reputation. Although he never lived there, he spent years renovating it with the help of IMPay. In 2003, he sold it to U2 singer Bono. In 1984, Jobs bought the Jacqueline House and Estate, and resided there for a decade. After that, he leased it out for several years until 2000 when he stopped maintaining the house, allowing exposure to the weather to degrade it. In 2004, Jobs received permission from the town of Woodside to demolish the house in order to build a smaller contemporary-styled one. After a few years in court, the house was finally demolished in 2011, a few months before he died. In early 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh, which was based on the Lisa and Xerox PARC's mouse-driven graphical user interface, and conceived by early Apple employee Jeff Raskin. The following year, Apple aired a Super Bowl television commercial titled 1984. At Apple's annual shareholders meeting on January 24, 1984, an emotional Jobs introduced the Macintosh to a wildly enthusiastic audience. Andy Hertzfeld described the scene as pandemonium. Though marketed and received in fanfare, The expensive Macintosh was a hard sell. Shortly after its release in 1985, Bill Gates' then developing company, Microsoft, threatened to stop developing Mac applications unless it was granted a license for the Mac operating system software. Microsoft was developing its graphical user interface, for DOS, which it was calling Windows, and didn't want Apple to sue over the similarities between the Windows GUI and the Mac interface. Scully granted Microsoft the license, which later led to problems for Apple. In addition, cheap IBM PC clones that ran on Microsoft software and had a graphical user interface began to appear. Although the Macintosh preceded the clones, it was far more expensive, so through the late 1980s, the Windows user interface was getting better and was thus taking increasingly more share from Apple. Windows-based IBM PC clones also led to the development of additional GUIs such as IBM's TopView or Digital Research's GEM, and thus the graphical user interface was beginning to be taken for granted, undermining the most apparent advantage of the Mac. It seemed clear as the 1980s wound down that Apple couldn't go it alone indefinitely against the whole IBM clone market. Scully's and Jobs' respective visions for the company greatly differed. The former favored open architecture computers like the Apple II, sold to education, small business, and home markets less vulnerable to IBM. Jobs wanted the company to focus on the closed architecture Macintosh as a business alternative to the IBM PC. President and CEO Scully had little control over Chairman of the Board Jobs' Macintosh division. It and the Apple II division operated like separate companies, duplicating services. Although its products provided 85% of Apple's sales in early 1985, the company's January 1985 annual meeting did not mention the Apple II division or employees. Many left, including Wozniak, who stated that the company had been going in the wrong direction for the last 5 years and sold most of his stock. The Macintosh's failure to defeat the PC strengthened Scully's position in the company. In May 1985, Scully, encouraged by Arthur Rock, decided to reorganize Apple, and proposed a plan to the board that would remove Jobs from the Macintosh group and put him in charge of new product development. This move would effectively render Jobs powerless within Apple. In response, Jobs then developed a plan to get rid of Scully and take over Apple. However, Jobs was confronted after the plan was leaked, and he said that he would leave Apple. The board declined his resignation and asked him to reconsider. Scully also told Jobs that he had all of the votes needed to go ahead with the reorganization. A few months later, on September 17, 1985, Jobs submitted a letter of resignation to the Apple board. 5 additional senior Apple employees also resigned and joined Jobs in his new venture, NeXT. 1985 to 1997. NeXT Computer. Following his resignation from Apple in 1985, Jobs founded NeXT Incorporated with $7 million. A year later he was running out of money, and he sought venture capital with no product on the horizon. Eventually, Jobs attracted the attention of billionaire Ross Perot, who invested heavily in the company. The NeXT computer was shown to the world in what was considered Jobs' comeback event, a lavish invitation-only gala launch event that was described as a multimedia extravaganza. The celebration was held at the Louis M. Davis Symphony Hall, San Francisco, California on Wednesday, October 12, 1988. Steve Wozniak said in a 2013 interview that while Jobs was at NeXT he was really getting his head together. NeXT workstations were first released in 1990 and priced at $9,999. Like the Apple Lisa, the NeXT workstation was technologically advanced and designed for the education sector, but was largely dismissed as cost-prohibitive for educational institutions. The NeXT workstation was known for its technical strengths, chief among them its object-oriented software development system. Jobs marketed NeXT products to the financial, scientific, and academic community, highlighting its innovative, experimental new technologies, such as the Mach kernel, the digital signal processor chip, and the built-in Ethernet port. Making use of a NeXT computer, English computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1990 at CERN in Switzerland. The revised, second-generation NextCube was released in 1990. Jobs touted it as the first interpersonal computer that would replace the personal computer. With its innovative NextMail multimedia email system, NextCube could share voice, image, graphics, and video in email for the first time. Interpersonal computing is going to revolutionize human communications and group work, Jobs told reporters. Jobs ran NeXT with an obsession for aesthetic perfection, as evidenced by the development of and attention to NextCube's magnesium case. This put considerable strain on NeXT's hardware division, and in 1993, after having sold only 50,000 machines, NeXT transitioned fully to software development with the release of NeXTSTEP, Intel. The company reported its first profit of $1.03 million in 1994. In 1996, NeXT Software Incorporated released WebObjects, a framework for web application development. After NeXT was acquired by Apple Incorporated in 1997, WebObjects was used to build and run the Apple Store, MobileMe services, and the iTunes Store. Pixar and Disney. In 1986, Jobs funded the spin-out of the graphics group, later renamed Pixar, from Lucasfilm's computer graphics division for the price of $10 million, $5 million of which was given to the company as capital and $5 million of which was paid to Lucasfilm for technology rights. The first film produced by Pixar with its Disney partnership, Toy Story, 1995, with Jobs credited as executive producer, brought fame and critical acclaim to the studio when it was released. Over the next 15 years, under Pixar's creative chief John Lasseter, the company produced box office hits A Bug's Life, 1998, Toy Story 2, 1999, Monsters Incorporated, 2001, Finding Nemo, 2003, The Incredibles, 2004, Cars, 2006, Ratatouille, 2007, Wall-E, 2008, Up, 2009, and Toy Story 3, 2010. Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Wall-E, Up and Toy Story 3 each received the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, an award introduced in 2001. In 2003 and 2004, as Pixar's contract with Disney was running out, Jobs and Disney chief executive Michael Eisner tried but failed to negotiate a new partnership, and in January 2004, Jobs announced that he would never deal with Disney again. Pixar would seek a new partner to distribute its films after its contract expired. In October 2005, Bob Iger replaced Eisner at Disney, and Iger quickly worked to mend relations with Jobs and Pixar. On January 24, 2006, Jobs and Iger announced that Disney had agreed to purchase Pixar in an all-stock transaction worth $7.4 billion. When the deal closed, Jobs became the Walt Disney Company's largest single shareholder with approximately 7% of the company's stock. Jobs' holdings in Disney far exceeded those of Eisner, who holds 1.7%, and of Disney family member Roy E. Disney, who until his 2009 death held about 1% of the company's stock and whose criticisms of Eisner, especially that he soured Disney's relationship with Pixar, accelerated Eisner's ousting. Upon completion of the merger, Jobs received 7% of Disney shares, and joined the board of directors as the largest individual shareholder. Upon Jobs' death, his shares in Disney were transferred to the Stephen P. Jobs Trust led by Laurene Jobs. After Jobs' death, Iger recalled in 2019 that many warned him about Jobs, that he would bully me and everyone else. Iger wrote, "Who wouldn't want Steve Jobs to have influence over how a company is run? And that as an active Disney board member he rarely created trouble for me. Not never but rarely." He speculated that they would have seriously considered merging Disney and Apple had Jobs lived. Floyd Norman, of Pixar, described Jobs as a mature, mellow individual who never interfered with the creative process of the filmmakers. In early June 2014, Pixar co-founder and Walt Disney Animation Studios president Ed Catmull revealed that Jobs once advised him to just explain it to them until they understand in disagreements. Catmull released the book Creativity Incorporated in 2014, in which he recounts numerous experiences of working with Jobs. Regarding his own manner of dealing with Jobs, Catmull writes: "In all the 26 years with Steve and I never had one of these loud verbal arguments, and it's not my nature to do that, but we did disagree fairly frequently about things. I would say something to him and he would immediately shoot it down because he could think faster than I could. I would then wait a week, I'd call him up and I'd give my counter argument to what he had said and he'd immediately shoot it down. So I had to wait another week, and sometimes this went on for months. But in the end one of three things happened. About a third of the time he said, 'Oh, I get it, you're right.' And that was the end of it. And it was another third of the time in which I'd say, 'Actually I think he is right.' The other third of the time, where we didn't reach consensus, he just let me do it my way, never said anything more about it." Family. Brennan notes that after Jobs was forced out of Apple, he apologized many times over for his behavior towards her and Lisa. She also states that Jobs said that he never took responsibility when he should have, and that he was sorry. By this time, Jobs had developed a strong relationship with Lisa, and when she was 9, Jobs had her name on her birth certificate changed from Lisa Brennan to Lisa Brennan Jobs. In addition, Jobs and Brennan developed a working relationship to co-parent Lisa, a change Brennan credits to the influence of his newly found biological sister, Mona Simpson, who worked to repair the relationship between Lisa and Jobs. Jobs found Mona after first finding his birth mother, Joanne Siebel Simpson, shortly after he left Apple. Jobs did not contact his birth family during his adoptive mother Clara's lifetime, however. He would later tell his official biographer Walter Isaacson, "I never wanted Paul and Clara to feel like I didn't consider them my parents, because they were totally my parents. I loved them so much that I never wanted them to know of my search, and I even had reporters keep it quiet when any of them found out." However, in 1986, when he was 31, Clara was diagnosed with lung cancer. He began to spend a great deal of time with her and learned more details about her background and his adoption, information that motivated him to find his biological mother. Jobs found on his birth certificate the name of the San Francisco doctor to whom Siebel had turned when she was pregnant. Although the doctor did not help Jobs while he was alive, he left a letter for Jobs to be opened upon his death. As he died soon afterwards, Jobs was given the letter which stated that his mother had been an unmarried graduate student from Wisconsin named Joanne Siebel. Jobs only contacted Siebel after Clara died and after he received permission from his father, Paul. In addition, out of respect for Paul, he asked the media not to report on his search. Jobs stated that he was motivated to find his birth mother out of both curiosity and a need to see if she was okay and to thank her, "Because I'm glad I didn't end up as an abortion. She was 23 and she went through a lot to have me." Siebel was emotional during their first meeting, though she wasn't familiar with the history of Apple or Jobs' role in it, and told him that she had been pressured into signing the adoption papers. She said that she regretted giving him up and repeatedly apologized to him for it. Jobs and Siebel would develop a friendly relationship throughout the rest of his life and would spend Christmas together. During this first visit, Siebel told Jobs that he had a sister, Mona, who was not aware that she had a brother. Siebel then arranged for them to meet in New York where Mona worked. Her first impression of Jobs was that he was totally straightforward and lovely, just a normal and sweet guy. Simpson and Jobs then went for a long walk to get to know each other. Jobs later told his biographer that Mona was not completely thrilled at first to have me in her life and have her mother so emotionally affectionate toward me. As we got to know each other, we became really good friends, and she is my family. I don't know what I'd do without her. I can't imagine a better sister. My adopted sister, Patty, and I were never close. Jobs then learned his family history. 6 months after he was given up for adoption, Siebel's father died, Shiwa Jandali, and they had a daughter, Mona. Jandali states that after finishing his PhD he returned to Syria to work and that it was during this period that Siebel left him. They divorced in 1962. He also states that after the divorce he lost contact with Mona for a period of time. I also bear the responsibility for being away from my daughter when she was 4 years old, as her mother divorced me when I went to Syria, but we got back in touch after 10 years. We lost touch again when her mother moved and I didn't know where she was, but since 10 years ago we've been in constant contact, and I see her 3 times a year. I organized a trip for her last year to visit Syria and Lebanon and she went with a relative from Florida. A few years later, Sybil married an ice skating teacher, George Simpson. Mona Jandali took her stepfather's last name and thus became Mona Simpson. In 1970, after they divorced, Sybil took Mona to Los Angeles and raised her on her own. Jobs told his official biographer that after meeting Simpson, he wanted to become involved in her ongoing search for their father. When he was found working in Sacramento, they decided that only Simpson would meet him. Jandali and Simpson spoke for several hours, at which point he told her that he had left teaching for the restaurant business. He also said that he and Sybil had given another child away for adoption but that we'll never see that baby again. That baby's gone. Simpson did not mention that she had met Jobs. Jandali further told Simpson that he once managed a Mediterranean restaurant near San Jose and that all of the successful technology people used to come there. Even Steve Jobs, oh yeah, he used to come in, and he was a sweet guy and a big tipper. After hearing about the visit, Jobs recalled it was amazing. I had been to that restaurant a few times, and I remember meeting the owner. He was Syrian. Balding. We shook hands. However, Jobs did not want to meet Jandali because I was a wealthy man by then, and I didn't trust him not to try to blackmail me or go to the press about it. I asked Mona not to tell him about me. Jandali later discovered his relationship to Jobs through an online blog. He then contacted Simpson and asked, "What is this thing about Steve Jobs?" Simpson told him that it was true and later commented, "My father is thoughtful and a beautiful storyteller, but he is very, very passive." He never contacted Steve. Because Simpson, herself, researched her Syrian roots and began to meet members of the family, she assumed that Jobs would eventually want to meet their father, but he never did. Jobs also never showed an interest in his Syrian heritage or the Middle East. Simpson fictionalized the search for their father in the 1992 novel, The Lost Father. Malek Jandali is their cousin. In 1989, Jobs first met his future wife, Laureen Powell, when he gave a lecture at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she was a student. Soon after the event, he stated that Laureen was right there in the front row in the lecture hall, and I couldn't take my eyes off of her, kept losing my train of thought, and started feeling a little giddy. After the lecture, Jobs met up with her in the parking lot and invited her out to dinner. From that point forward, they were together, with a few minor exceptions, for the rest of his life. Powell's father died when she was very young, and her mother raised her in a middle-class New Jersey home similar to the one Jobs grew up in. After she received her BA from the University of Pennsylvania, she spent a short period in high finance but found it didn't interest her, so she decided to pursue her MBA at Stanford instead. In addition, unlike Jobs, she was athletic and followed professional sports. She also brought as much self-sufficiency to the relationship as he did and was more of a private than public person. Jobs proposed on New Year's Day 1990 with a fistful of freshly picked wildflowers. They married on March 18, 1991, in a Buddhist ceremony at the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite National Park. 50 people, including his father, Paul, and his sister, Mona, attended. The ceremony was conducted by Jobs's guru, Kapunchino Odagawa. The vegan wedding cake was in the shape of Yosemite's half dome, and the wedding ended with a hike, during which Laureen's brothers had a snowball fight. Jobs is reported to have said to Mona, "You see, Mona, Laureen is descended from Joan Emhoff, and we're descended from John Muir." Jobs's and Powell's first child, Reed, was born September 1991. Jobs's father, Paul, died a year and a half later, on March 5, 1993. Jobs and Powell had 2 more children, Aaron, born in August 1995, and Eve, born in 1998. The family lived in Palo Alto, California. A journalist who grew up locally remembered him as owning the house with the scariest, Halloween, Decorations in Palo Alto. I don't remember seeing him. I was busy being terrified. 1997 to 2011. Return to Apple. In 1996, Apple announced that it would buy NeXT for $427 million. The deal was finalized in February 1997, bringing Jobs back to the company he had co-founded. Jobs became de facto chief after then CEO Gil Amelio was ousted in July 1997. He was formally named interim chief executive in September. In March 1998, to concentrate Apple's efforts on returning to profitability, Jobs terminated a number of projects, such as Newton, CyberDog, and OpenDoc. In the coming months, many employees developed a fear of encountering Jobs while riding in the elevator, afraid that they might not have a job when the doors opened. The reality was that Jobs' summary executions were rare, but a handful of victims was enough to terrorize a whole company. Jobs changed the licensing program for Macintosh clones, making it too costly for the manufacturers to continue making machines. With the purchase of NeXT, much of the company's technology found its way into Apple products, most notably NeXTSTEP, which evolved into Mac OS X under Jobs' guidance. The company increased sales significantly with the introduction of the iMac and other new products. Since then, appealing designs and powerful branding have worked well for Apple. At the 2000 Macworld Expo, Jobs officially dropped the interim modifier from his title at Apple and became permanent CEO. Jobs quipped at the time that he would be using the title ISHAO. The company subsequently branched out, introducing and improving upon other digital appliances. With the introduction of the iPod portable music player, iTunes digital music software, and the iTunes Store, the company made forays into consumer electronics and music distribution. On June 29, 2007, Apple entered the cellular phone business with the introduction of the iPhone, a multi-touch display cell phone, which also included the features of an iPod and, with its own mobile browser, revolutionized the mobile browsing scene. While nurturing open-ended innovation, Jobs also reminded his employees that real artists ship. Jobs had a public war of words with Dell Computer CEO Michael Dell, starting in 1987, when Jobs first criticized Dell for making uninnovative beige boxes. On October 6, 1997, at a Gartner symposium, when Dell was asked what he would do if he ran the then troubled Apple Computer Company, he said, "I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders." Then, in 2006, Jobs sent an email to all employees when Apple's market capitalization rose above Dell's. It turned out that Michael Dell wasn't perfect at predicting the future. Based on today's stock market close, Apple is worth more than Dell. Stocks go up and down, and things may be different tomorrow, but I thought it was worth a moment of reflection today. Steve Jobs was both admired and criticized for his consummate skill at persuasion and salesmanship, which has been dubbed the reality distortion field, and was particularly evident during his keynote speeches, colloquially known as Steve Notes, at Macworld Expos and at Apple Worldwide Developers Conferences. Jobs was a board member at Gap Incorporated from 1999 to 2002. In 2001, Jobs was granted stock options in the amount of 7.5 million shares of Apple with an exercise price of $18.30. It was alleged that the options had been backdated, and that the exercise price should have been $21.10. It was further alleged that Jobs had thereby incurred taxable income of $20 million that he did not report, and that Apple overstated its earnings by that same amount. As a result, Jobs potentially faced a number of criminal charges and civil penalties. The case was the subject of active criminal and civil government investigations, though an independent internal Apple investigation completed on December 29, 2006 found that Jobs was unaware of these issues and that the options granted to him were returned without being exercised in 2003. In 2005, Jobs responded to criticism of Apple's poor recycling programs for e-waste in the US by lashing out at environmental and other advocates at Apple's annual meeting in Cupertino in April. A few weeks later, Apple announced it would take back iPods for free at its retail stores. The Computer Take Back campaign responded by flying a banner from a plane over the Stanford University graduation at which Jobs was the commencement speaker. The banner read, "Steve, don't be a mini player, recycle all e-waste." In 2006, he further expanded Apple's recycling programs to any U.S. customer who buys a new Mac. This program includes shipping and environmentally friendly disposal of their old systems. The success of Apple's unique products and services provided several years of stable financial returns, propelling Apple to become the world's most valuable publicly traded company in 2011. Jobs was P.